Hello and welcome, and this is Peter, and the first thing I'd like to say to you is thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you, so thanks for dropping by and thanks for listening. Today's audio, I want to talk about a distinction from the Landmark Forum called looking good. Okay, this is a fun distinction, and it's one that I like talking about because, damn it, I was the epitome of looking good when I first heard about this. I mean, hell, I worked for IBM, and IBM was the lookingest, goodest company in the world, and I worked in IBM marketing, which was the lookingest, goodingest portion of the lookingest, goodingest company in the world. So I was right out there in looking good with my blue suit, white shirt, and red tie, right? So let's talk about looking good, okay? Because looking good is it's something innately human. We all have it. We know we have it as soon as it's mentioned, and we know that it's socially important. But most of us are not really that sure just exactly how much it drives our lives, and it does. So we've all heard the expression, you need to save face, you need to keep up appearances, you need to, don't air your dirty laundry in public, these sorts of things. And these things are all about keeping up appearances in the social group. Continuing to look in control, continuing to present that you're doing well. The keeping up with the Joneses. We're doing quite fine, thank you very much. Everything's great. We've got this facade out the front, and behind that facade, things have completely turned to crap. Right? That's looking good. So looking good is a way of going out into the world and presenting the most positive view of yourself out into the world in return for, what you can get out of doing that. So, for example, when you go into a sales call, what do? You wear a suit, you wear a tie, maybe. Steve Jobs made the black polo neck vest a bit of a topic, a bit of an item. But in general, salesmen will dress very well, and they'll present themselves very well, and they'll present themselves as successful, even if they're on hard times. Okay? Why? Because people buy from people who look successful. Okay? In general. People will buy from people who look successful in general. Okay? So, salesmen in particular will be very well presented. They'll be looking good. Now, the same in relationships. When I announced that Jennifer and I were going to divorce, everyone was shocked. Everyone was shocked because they thought that we looked like the perfect couple. They thought we were very happy. Why? Because I didn't tell them that my wife was being a complete bitch to me. Why would I do that? Now, presumably, Jennifer told a few of her women friends that I was the horriblest, nastiest person on the face of the planet. Who knows, right? But everyone was very surprised when I announced our divorce because I had been, quote, looking good. I hadn't disparaged my wife in any way, shape or form publicly. The events of the forum in 1995 were long forgotten. I did tell people in 1995, after I did the forum, that I had been considering divorcing Jennifer because of her terrible behaviour towards me, but she has promised to do much better in the future. And so, we're married and happy. So I only told people that that I'd been unhappy with her after we'd sorted that out. I didn't tell anybody about that beforehand, right? I was looking good. I was protecting the reputation of my wife. Now, we all know that women absolutely do not protect the reputations of their husbands, right? Women are absolutely happy to walk into a divorce court and commit the crime of perjury against their husband, telling lies about him to destroy his reputation rather than defend and protect his reputation, right? We all know that, and we all know that all women support this perjury in divorce courts because they've proven that in spades over the last 10 years. So looking good is something that in particular men will do in an effort to appear in control, to be strong and all these things, because it's valued within the social circle, right? Men don't want men around who are whiny bitches who complain about everything and that sort of stuff. We just don't want those guys around. We want tough guys. We want guys who can get the job done, right? That's who we want around us, not the whiny guys, okay, who will sit and whinge and bitch and moan and complain rather than get off their ass and go do something. So amongst men, the putting on the persona of looking good out in front of other men has value within the social group. And that's why we do it, right? It's why we do it. But it has a cost. It has benefits, right? If you are looking good and appearing to do well, then you will be accepted in your social group and you'll be expected to pull your weight and do your part and those sorts of things, right? So it has benefits, the acceptance of the social group, the ability to work in teams and these sort of things. It goes down to employment in the end with men. If you're a whingy, bitchy, moany, complaining kind of man, you're going to have a hard time finding work, okay? You go to a job interview and you whinge and bitch and moan and complain about your prior employer, you're going to have a problem with that job interview, right? So looking good has real, tangible benefits for men. Very tangible benefits. That's why we do it. And it's had these tangible benefits for many, many thousands of years. You know, the man with the most assets, the man with the most resources, the lookingest, goodest man tended to get the prettier woman, right? That's been something that's gone on for thousands of years. So there is a biological advantage or benefit to it as well. The prettiest women tend to go for the best looking, most successful men in the community, however that is measured, right? When you don't have forced marriages or arranged marriages, when women are given the choice of who they will reproduce with, they will reproduce with the men who occur to them as the most successful. And that's all part of the looking good paradigm, right? So there are many, many real life benefits for looking good and being stoic and tolerating what's going on and just getting on and not whinging, bitching, moaning and complaining. Right? Plenty of benefits. But there are costs. And to make you acutely aware of the costs, I'll bring up the subject of a good colleague of mine. I won't say that we were friends. We were colleagues. We worked together. He was a brilliant young man, and his name was Bruce Napthali. Okay? And Bruce was really smart. Bruce, if I had to guess his IQ, I'd put it around 135, maybe as high as 140. Bruce was really smart. Great with Unix. He was my Unix guy, right? At Hitachi. What he had forgotten more about Unix than I will ever know in my lifetime, right? He could make these things absolutely sing. And so when I was at Hitachi and we were selling Unix boxes, sequence boxes, Bruce was my go-to guy, right? He was the guy that I had to go talk to when my very sketchy and old university Unix didn't cut it. Bruce was the guy I had to go talk to. And he was a really lovely young man, really lovely guy. And one of the things, you know, we had some side conversations because I had two children. And we had the side conversation a number of times with Bruce coming to me and saying to me, you know, my wife is asking about having children and I just don't know if I'm ready yet. You know, and you've got two children and you seem happy and I'm seeking your advice and guidance on how do you know when you're ready to have children? And, you know, my advice and guidance to young Bruce was, if you don't know that you're ready to have children, if you're not 1000% in your heart, absolutely convinced that you want children and this is the right thing to do, and you're willing to be committed to providing for these children for the next 25 years, if you're not 1000% on board with, this is the right thing to do, right? If you're not there yet, Bruce, you're not ready to have children because you've got to be there. If children is a choice, you've got to be there. 1000%, I'm signed up. I want to do this. Because I can tell you, it's really hard work raising a family for the man. It's really hard work. It's much less work for the woman. It's really, really, really hard work for the man. And I said to him, you've seen what I do. Like, we work closer together. You've seen what I do. You've seen the hours I work. You've seen the travel I undertake. I'm not doing this because, hey, I really like working 15 or 16 hours a day, Bruce. I'm not doing it because of that. I'm doing it because I love my wife, I love my children, and I'm working my ass off to make as much money as I can to provide for my wife and my children. And, my life is, at the moment, I'm getting to do a lot of things that I want to do, but my life is very much a sacrifice to my wife and my children. And Bruce, I tell you, if you're not there, if you're not fully on board with being willing to do that for 20 years, if you're not absolutely convinced this is 100% the right thing to do, my advice to you is don't do it yet. My advice is just wait, maybe one day, but don't do it yet, right? That's my advice, if you're asking me. Because I can tell you, I told him the story of when I hit that spot, when I became 110% convinced, 1000% convinced that I wanted to do this. There was an instant that happened. And I told him, there will be an instant in your life where that happens. If you ever go on to have children, there will be an instant in your life where that happens. You'll just know, right? You'll just know. And if you don't know, don't do it, because it's tough. It's hard enough. I said to him, it's hard enough for me to do this as it is, having chosen. And, I want this. I wanted this. It's still hard enough. And he's like, okay, I hear what you're saying. I said, by all means, go and talk to other men and ask other men as well. Okay? And get a consensus of opinion. Get a number of different men's views, because this is the biggest single decision you'll ever make. Having a child is the biggest decision you'll ever make. So don't just do it because your wife is pushing you for it, okay? So, okay, thanks very much, and off he went. Now, a little while later, Bruce has his insight, and he decides to have a child, right? And he's fully on board. It's not an oops baby or anything else like that. He's fully on board. Oh, what happens? 6 months after the child is born, the wife decides she doesn't really love him. She's changed her mind, and she's going to divorce him and screw him over. And I didn't know how bad the screwing over was in the divorce courts. And she's going to dump him and leave him, right? And Bruce, being a sensitive young man, was devastated. He was devastated. So we all said to him, obviously we all talked to him in our team. We finished up saying to him as a group, take some time off. We'll do whatever it takes to cover for your work. Take some time off, and when you're ready, come back. Okay? But take time off, and when you're ready, come back. And I felt particularly terrible for this man, because I was one of the people who said, when you know that you're ready to have a child, then you go forward. And here his wife was stealing his little baby girl that he was absolutely, devotedly in love with. Fathers with their newborn little baby girls, it's quite something to behold. And Bruce was one of those guys who was absolutely devoted to his little baby girl. And the idea of his little baby girl being taken away from him, that hurt. So we all pitched in and we covered for him for a couple of months. And then after a couple of months, he seemed to be coming out of this depression. And it was depression. And he bought himself a new little sports car, and he got himself a new little girlfriend, and all the rest of it, right? And so we were talking amongst ourselves, and our boss, we had the same manager, really lovely guy by the name of Chris. Really had a lot of time for him. And Chris said, I think it's about time that Bruce came back to work, and it's my job to go talk with him about that. So Chris had a chat with Bruce, and he came back to work, and he was back in the office, and he was smiling, and he was laughing, and he was happy. In short, he was looking good, right? In short, he was looking good. And we were saying to him, great to see you back, really good to have you back. Terribly sorry about what's happening, and if there's anything we can do for you, just ask. And Bruce is like, no, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm coming back. He was looking good. And he told his looking good story to us, and we believed it, gentlemen. Young Bruce told his good looking story to us, and he told us so well. He told his story so well. He was so adept at looking good. We believed him. Every one of us. We believed him. And you know what's coming next. You know what I talk about a lot in other areas. Gentlemen, you know what's coming next. One day, Chris calls us all into just the open area of the office and says, hard to repeat it even today. He says to us, gentlemen, I have to deliver to you the worst news I've ever had to deliver to any of my colleagues before. And we're like, what? What's happened? And he says, Bruce has last night hung himself. Simple as that. Bruce has last night hung himself. And we were like, what? And Chris just looked down at his feet. And to say that we were shocked was the understatement. I cannot stress to you how shocked we were. This fine young man, remarkable young man, very talented, very knowledgeable, very hardworking, the kind of man that you would say, I am so damn lucky to have that guy working with me in my team. That guy, that's the sort of guy you want working for you. He would work any hours, he'd do anything to help you get a deal, anything with installed machines to make sure they were running smoothly. That guy would do anything to help you, to make you be successful in the sales situation. Having that guy in your team, what a treasure. What a treasure. What a great young man. And here he was, by his own hand, had hung himself because he couldn't stand to live without his little baby girl that I, for one, had in many ways encouraged him to have. Gentlemen, I can't tell you how big a shock that was. I just can't tell you. And in the following weeks, as the guys in our team sat around lunch tables and things like that a few times, very quiet lunches, the question we asked ourselves and discussed ourselves is, should we have seen this coming? Is there anything, we were all here, we all saw him, we all talked to him. Should we have seen this coming? Is there something else we could have done? And I can tell you, gentlemen, the team of us, we felt really guilty. We felt really bad that this young man his depression and his pain had escaped us, that we didn't notice it in time to save his life. This young man was so adept at looking good, so adept at presenting himself that he had gotten over this situation and he was on the road to recovery. He was so adept at that not even those of us who knew him well, who worked next to him, picked it. Gentlemen, ultimately, that's the price of looking good. Right? The ultimate price of running your looking good can be your life. It can be your life. Excuse me. So this thing that we call looking good, we get value out of it because we get acceptance from our social group. And it's only in general, in collaboration with our social group, that we can earn our incomes, that we can survive. If we don't have the approval of our social group, then, we might have to go live in a cabin in the woods. Okay? Something else like that. We have to have the approval of our social group to the extent that they will not kick us out of their community, at worst. So there is value in looking good. And amongst men, we don't particularly like men who demonstrate their emotions. We're trained out of that to a great extent. And yet, looking good in the situation of young Bruce Napthali cost him his life. His friends, his colleagues did not recognize the emotional distress and pain he was in to offer him that helping hand that might have just saved his life. Didn't notice it. Couldn't tell. And gentlemen, I was one of them. As much as it pains me and shames me to admit it, I was one of the men. I sat 2 cubicles from that man, literally across the cubicle. You had those sets of 4 cubicles together. He literally sat diagonally across from me. I was 2 cubicles from that man, and I didn't have the foggiest clue that he was suicidal. Shame on me. Gentlemen, shame on me that I didn't notice that. Shame on me that with all that I knew, with all that I understood about what it means to be human, shame on me I didn't pick it. And I can tell you, gentlemen, over the years, my memory of young Bruce and my shame that I didn't pick that he was suicidal, that hurts, gentlemen. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable. So I've gone out of my way over the last 10 years, 20 years, more than 22 years ago, or 21 years ago now, that young Bruce hung himself. And since I understood the criminal abuse that men suffer in the divorce courts, I've saved many other men's lives. So most recently was just a few months ago. So gentlemen, there we have this thing called looking good, where we try and present out into the world that we're doing okay, we're successful, we're this, we're that, we're the other. Like me, do business with me, I'm good, everything's okay. We have that. It has value, right? It has value. Turned straight into dollars, euros, pounds, whatever you want to, whatever currency you're dealing. Looking good turns into money, which is one of the reasons that we do it so often. But looking good can also cost you your life. And you want to think about that. You want to think about when is it that we should present ourselves out as having emotions, as having feelings, as being real people, human beings. Perhaps us men should think about that more. And you gentlemen by now know and understand my love for examples, right? You know and understand my love for examples. So let me give you an example of how this looking good works in our society. So many years ago, in the 90s, 20-something years ago, my father's mother passed away. Nana Nolan was how she was known to me, of course. And obviously I knew this woman my whole life. And I loved my nanas. They were fantastic. And, we'd often stay at her place and she'd give us food and she'd play with us and fuss over us and all that stuff. Nanas are wonderful in a young boy's life, right? We know all that. And so on the event of the death of both my grandmothers, but Nana Nolan happened to be the first of my two grandmothers to pass, on the event of the death of my grandmothers, my father, who was the oldest son, decided to break with tradition for the grandchildren's eulogy, right? So the tradition in our family for the grandchildren's eulogy of the grandmother or grandfather was that the eldest grandson would give the eulogy. And in our family on Dad's side, the eldest grandson was my older brother, because Dad was the oldest son, and he'd married first, and he'd had the first child, right? That's just how that goes. Typically, the oldest child will have the first baby. Typically, not always, but that happens. And so the tradition would have been that my eldest brother would have given the eulogy. Now, I don't know if my father and my eldest brother actually ever had a conversation, but my father announced that he was going to break with tradition and that he was going to give the grandchildren themselves the authority to choose who they wanted to speak on their behalf, right? And by that he meant he was going to give the grandchildren a vote. All the grandchildren over 18, obviously. No, none of the kids. So, because there was plenty of grandchildren under 18. So the grandchildren under 18 were allowed to talk to the grandchildren over 18 and talk about who they wanted to give the eulogy, but they didn't get a vote, right? So imagine the scenario that my father announced that the grandchildren's eulogy for his mother was going to be voted on by the grandchildren themselves, and all grandchildren over the age of 18 would get one vote each. And they could decide amongst themselves who would give the grandchildren's eulogy for their grandmother rather than stick with the family tradition, as was his right to do. Right? It was my father's right as the oldest son to stick with the family tradition or break with the family tradition as he saw fit. Now, interestingly, I was chosen by my peers to give that eulogy. And that eulogy, gentlemen, is easily the greatest speech I have ever made. Eulogizing your grandmother. First, that my peers, my fellow grandchildren, my cousins, asked me to perform that eulogy. It is an honour above all other honours that I have been given. And it happened again with my other grandmother, right? With my other grandmother, her eldest son, Ronald, decided to follow the lead of my father. The same thing happened. He put it to a vote, and the same thing happened. My cousins on that side of the family voted for me to deliver the eulogy for my other grandmother. But that was the second one. And the second one is not always so impactful as the first one with many things. So here I was. My grandmother on my father's side was so well known in our town. This was a town of 35,000 people total, right? 1,000 people turned up midweek on a working day to my grandmother's funeral. 1,000 people. The old men that I talked to, and my grandmother was in her 80s, the old men that I talked to said in all their lives they'd never seen such a turnout. Think about that, gentlemen. Men of 80 years of age said to me, I've never seen such a turnout at a funeral. Your grandmother was one of the most beloved people in our community. Men said that to me. Old men said that to me on the day. So I gave this eulogy. There was 1,000 people there. We could only fit about 400 in the church. We held the ceremony in the largest church in Wagga, and we could fit about 400 people. Standing room only in the church, and we had to hook up speakers outside the church and around the church. Excuse me. And the crowd went out onto the road. There was people all around the churchyard, out onto the road. All there to pay respects for my grandmother. So I delivered this eulogy, and it was the greatest speech of my life, the most honoured speech of my life. And of course, during this eulogy, I cried. I was sad. I'm sad today. 25 years later, I'm sad. The passing of my grandmother. But here she was laid out in a coffin in front of me, and I was giving her eulogy about what she meant to me. And I was sad, and I cried, gentlemen. I was sad and I cried. Because I'm a human being, and I have strong emotions around my grandmother. So we take the procession, we put her into the funeral car, and we take the procession out to the cemetery, and we bury her. And I'm also given the honour of saying a few words over her coffin during the burial. And I cry again. And then on the way home, we're walking from the burial site where my grandmother's buried back to the car. Okay? And I'm walking side by side with my father. He's walking to my right hand side. I'm walking to his left hand side. And he says, Peter, I'm sorry, I apologize. And I look at him as we're walking along, and I say, I don't understand. What are you apologizing for? And he said, I thought you could handle it. And I said, handle what? And he said, the eulogy. I thought you could handle it. And I stopped walking so that he would stop walking and turn around and face me. And when we were standing there, face to face, just a few feet apart, I looked him in the eye and I said, do you not yet understand that my eulogy was perfect? And he looked at me and he gave me a long, hard look. And he says, now I do. I said, good. So I took a couple of steps forward, put my arm over his shoulder, and we walked back to the car together. My father was brought up in a time when a strong man, a tough man, a man as resilient as me, if I was standing up and giving a eulogy for my grandmother, whom I love dearly, I shouldn't cry. That's not a moment in which I should show emotions. He was brought up in that time. That to show emotion, to have tears over your beloved grandmother as you eulogize her, emotions are not acceptable. You're not looking good enough, right? You're not looking good enough as a man if you're crying while delivering the eulogy for your grandmother. You're not tough enough yet. You're not looking good enough yet, right? That was the time that he was raised in. Me, men don't come much tougher than me. 10 years of criminal abuse of 4 national governments. For those of you who don't know, I was actually jailed in Germany as a political prisoner on the direct orders of Angela Merkel. Men do not come any tougher than me. But in my time, I say that it's okay when you're eulogizing your grandmother to cry. And if anybody says otherwise, fine. If anybody says, no, it's not okay to cry as you're delivering the most important speech of your life, standing over the body of your grandmother in a church, if someone says, no, that's a time when you should not shed a tear, that's fine. I have some sympathy for that person. I have some empathy for that person. Because what kind of life are they living that they want to hide their feelings at that point in time? And what is the cost of doing that? Well, the cost of doing that might finish up being just like Bruce Napthali. The cost of doing that might just be suicide, right, gentlemen? So I really want you to understand that this thing we have of looking good, it has advantages. It will bring you money, right? You want to be a salesman. You want to sell $1 million deals to $1 billion companies. You are going to have to present an element of looking good. You are going to have to use that. But heed the warning, gentlemen. Heed the warning of Bruce Napthali. Heed the warning that if you are so looking good when you are actually depressed and down and suicidal, and you don't reach out and you don't tell other men, you might just pay the price that Bruce Napthali paid, which is suicide at the end of your life. And gentlemen, a lot of men pay that price. A lot of men pay that price. The most dangerous thing in the world for a man to do is not go to war. Gentlemen, going to war is way less dangerous than getting a divorce. Far more men today die from the criminal abuse of divorce courts than in warfare. Far more men. Literally, the most dangerous activity for a man in the Western world today is getting married and then getting divorced. Because until he gets divorced, the average man has just no clue how much he's been lied to until he gets divorced. And then when he gets divorced, he finds out how much he's been lied to. And many of those men put on a brave face. Many of those men put on looking good. All the way to the hangman's noose. All the way to the bullet in the head. All the way to the poison in his food. All the way to poison gas, sitting in his car and killing himself with carbon monoxide. Which is, gentlemen, exactly the way my father's father killed himself. Because when I was a child, and I would ask questions, where's granddad? One grandfather died of a heart attack, and the other grandfather died of, we were told, a car accident when I was young, all right? In fact, he died at the age of 59. His name was Charles Nolan, my father's father. His name was Charles Nolan. He died at the age of 55, which is the age I'll be in a few days. And we were told when we were young he died in a car accident. It was only when I was in my 30s that my father finally admitted to me that his father had committed suicide through locking himself in a garage and turning the car on and killing himself through carbon monoxide poisoning. And when I asked my father, why is it that you lied to me about this situation? He said, because I was fearful that one of my sons might grow up and commit suicide as well, said my father when I was in about my 30s. Then, when my wife committed perjury against me and my children were stolen, all those things happened, my father said to me, Peter, you just have to put up with this, because if you don't put up with this, you won't have any friends. What's that about, gentlemen? When my father said that, what's that about? Oh, well, if you don't just put on your looking good, if you just don't say, oh yeah, it's okay for my wife to commit perjury, it's okay for my children to be kidnapped and abused, it's okay for me to be criminally victimized, if you don't just put on your looking good and go out there and tell everyone everything's just perfectly okay, everything's perfectly peachy, if you don't do that, they won't be your friends anymore, they won't be in your social group anymore. My father knows that because he's seen it happen. And he said in that conversation, I've seen that happen to other men. Other men who've, quote, complained about being criminally victimized, my father said he'd seen them socially ostracized. Right? And to give you gentlemen an idea of just how tough a nut I am, I looked my father in the eye when he said that, and I said, any person who condones the crimes of my wife is not my friend, and I want nothing to do with them. End of sentence. That's what I said to my father. The idea that I would tolerate my wife committing perjury against me in order to save face with my so-called friends, excuse me, any person, I said to him, who condones the crimes of my wife is no friend of mine, and I want nothing to do with them. Gentlemen, I'm a man who doesn't need the approval of my social group. I don't need my social group. I don't need to kiss the ass of my social group. I can go get another social group, which is exactly what I did in the end. Right? So, my father wanted me to be another Bruce Knapfly. Just put a happy face on and go about your business. Oh yeah, when I was suicidal, did my father call me? Did my father send me an email when I was suicidal? No. He was too busy pandering to my ex-wife. My father literally pandered to my ex-wife and pandered to her crimes rather than support his own son. What did I do? I disowned him. I do not need the approval of my father I do not need the approval of my father. Period. I do not need to put on my looking good and say, oh, everything's just peachy with the crimes being committed against me to my community. I don't need to say that because I don't need the approval of my community. I left. And my community can do without me. Right? So this thing looking good, gentlemen, even someone as close to you as your father can push it at you, saying you really need to put on your looking good and just get out there and tell everyone that everything's peachy, otherwise these other people, they won't be your friends anymore. Your own father will say that to you, gentlemen. Right? Your own father will say that to you. You want to think about that, okay? You want to think about this thing called looking good, and you want to think about how seriously it can affect your life, okay? And as much as you might tend to run it automatically, when you're in the position, when you're running your looking good, you want to ask yourself, is there a price that I'm paying in order to be running this looking good right now? In order for me to misrepresent how I'm feeling into the community today, what price am I paying for that right now? And is it a price that I'm prepared to pay for that right now? Okay? So this is now, wow, I've just pulled a little recorder out of my pocket. It's 45 minutes. So this has been 45 minutes about looking good, gentlemen. It is a two-edged sword. It will bring you money. It will bring you cash when used properly. But when it's using you, it can bring you death. It can bring you destruction. And you as a man, you had better be aware that this is operating in your life. And you'd better be aware of the benefits and costs of this thing called looking good operating in your life. Because it is operating in your life. You can't live without it. You can't be socially acceptable without some degree of operating and running this thing called looking good. It's normal, it's natural, it's a standard piece of software us humans come with. But it's a very two-edged sword. And I wanted to give you this 46-minute audio about it because it is a very two-edged sword. You, as a salesman, someone who wants to sell million-dollar deals to billion-dollar companies, you will be running looking good a great deal of the time. But you want to look at that in a balanced viewpoint and understand whether the benefit of running this looking good might not have a cost that you're not quite aware of, like our friend young Bruce Knapfly, and the cost eventually being his life. Okay? So, I hope you enjoyed this audio. I hope it gave you something really to think about. Think hard about this, gentlemen. Don't just say, hey, Pete, that was a good audio, next. Think hard about this. Go through your life about this. Look at where you've sacrificed something in order to look good. And ask yourself, was the sacrifice worth it? Go look at that. Because I can tell you, gentlemen, someday or other, you might be in the position that I was in, where things were fairly difficult. And I was looking at the question, is it more important to keep up appearances? Is it more important to run my looking good than to save the lives of the next Bruce Knapflies? That's where I finished up, gentlemen. I finished up asking myself the question, is it more important for me to have social acceptance? Is it more important for me to falsely represent myself as being willing to be criminally abused by my own wife and children? Is it more important for me to lie and to deceive people that that's okay by me than it is to save the next man's life, who is going to be criminally abused, who is going to be looking good, and then going to kill himself? What's more important to me? What's my choice on that matter? I was faced with that choice, gentlemen. I was faced with that choice. I was faced with the choice of continuing on making my $200,000 or $300,000 a year, which I was making, right? As, gentlemen, just in case you don't know, my best year in 2006, just before I got divorced, was 269,000 euros. Using the prevailing exchange rate of the time, that was $340,000. That was my best year, right? That wasn't the normal average year. So I was capable of making $340,000, 269,000 euros off my own bat in a year, working with my good friend and colleague, Sean Kelly. And I asked myself the question, do I want that money more than I want to save the lives of the next Bruce Napthali? What do I want more? Given a choice, what do I choose? Money or saving men's lives? I made that choice, gentlemen. I made that choice in 2008. That choice, gentlemen, was I'm going to put the life of the next young Bruce Napthali in front of the money that I can earn selling data warehouses. I'm going to put men's lives in front of cold, hard cash. And you know something, gentlemen? In terms of looking good, that's looking very bad. In our society today, to put a man's life in front of money is to look bad. Gentlemen, right? I bet that 100% of my listeners are men. And in our society today, to put your life, gentlemen, to put your life in front of making money, that's called looking bad. In our society today, men's lives are supposed to be put well down below making money. Men's lives are supposed to be, completely disposable in the quest for money. Completely disposable in the quest for providing for women and children. Men's lives are disposable. And any man who stands up and says, I think it's more important to save a man's life than for me to personally make a whole lot more money, men who say that, well, that's looking bad. Men who say, I'm all for women's equality, and I think women should get equal sentencing for their crimes, and I think women who commit perjury in divorce courts should be prosecuted just like the men are, well, that's looking bad, gentlemen. And there's only a few of us who are willing to stand up in the public and say this stuff, knowing that we're going to be, one, lied about and slandered and ridiculed and abused, and two, we're going to have our ability to earn our incomes destroyed. So in my case, when I was faced with the choice, would I prefer to continue to uphold my looking good in the eyes of my community by the standards of my community and allow other young men to be criminally victimized to the point of suicide? Am I willing to do that, or will I get onto the side of the young men? I chose to get onto the side of the young men. And gentlemen, it has cost me my ability to earn $200,000, $300,000 US dollars for those of you who work in US dollars. You know, it has cost me my ability to make that amount of money, which is why I'm doing these audios on becoming a salesman. Because I can no longer, Peter Andrew Nolan, can no longer go out into my society, into my community, and sell million-dollar deals, BI deals, to billion-dollar companies for the reason that I put your life above money. That's why I'm making these audios, gentlemen. I'm making these audios because I was not prepared to pay the price of looking good if that price might be your life. Okay? Might be your life. It might be the next guy's life. It might be the next guy's life. But you know what, gentlemen? We can guarantee it's going to be some young man's life. It's going to be some series of young men's lives and older men's lives. Just recently I saved a man's life. My colleagues helped save a man's life who was 58. We are out there saving men's lives. And that violated the looking good of our societies, of our communities. The willingness to put a man's life, to value a man's life above cold hard cash, made me look bad in our society. Okay? So sometimes, gentlemen, you're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to think about, am I willing to keep playing this looking good game? Am I willing to keep looking good out there in the community even if I know the cost might be XYZ, whatever that cost might be. What deal am I willing to do with myself? And what am I willing to live with myself having done this deal? What is it? You'll come across that question, gentlemen. Now that you know that looking good is a real thing for you, you will come across this question. Where, how much am I using looking good? And how much is looking good using me? And what's the price I'm paying? What's the compromise I'm making? This question, you can't avoid it now that you've heard this audio, gentlemen. You can't avoid it. So with that, gentlemen, wow, 55 minutes. With that, gentlemen, it's becoming dark here in this park that I'm in. I've shot over 2 hours of audio today, and it's been a fantastic day, a productive day, and I think it's time to go get a nice cappuccino and a bite to eat after a very productive afternoon in my new office. And I can tell you, gentlemen, trading a cubicle for a great big wonderful park with beautiful blue skies, although it's a little cloudy now as night falls, this is a really nice office. So with that, gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you very much for listening, and bye for now.